It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello and welcome to another episode of Pure Performance, our second episode of 2017. Hello, Andy.
Hey, Brian.
Hey, so before nothing, but you're calling me Brian right now, and our guest's name is Brian. So I'm going to attempt to be respectful and allow our guest and allow our
two Brians.
Hey, guest Brian, no speaking until we address you.
Oh, gotcha.
I'll defer to him as Brian, and I will give you permission instead to reference me as Emperor during the show, because that is part of my...
You're so modest.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So you can refer to me as Emperor, and our guest Brian can be Brian. So speaking of our guest Brian, Andy, would you like to give a brief introduction before he introduces himself?
Sure. So here's Andy again. I'm a little jet lagged. I just got off the plane, and I think I've been up for 36 hours now. And thanks to coffee, keeps me going. And I'm really happy today for this webinar. Oh, actually, not a webinar; it's a podcast. See, my mind is a little strange, but it's going to be fun. So here's the thing: in the real Brian that we call Brian today, I've known him for quite a while, and the last time I bumped into him was in Tampa, Florida, at one of our Dynatrace user groups meeting. And at the end of the meeting, I believe, Brian came over to me and said, "Hey, there's some cool stuff I want to show you." And then he showed me some dashboards that Brian has been using in production to actually make some sense of the data to better understand the behavior of the app and actually some traffic patterns. And then he actually, I believe, came up with the term that we use for today's episode, which is why you have to love your data and tear down walls between ops and test. And actually, I think it's great that we actually call it from ops to test, because I think this is some stuff that we can learn today for operations on how they can monitor applications better, how to monitor them, and then feed data back to test. And before I really let the Brian introduce himself, I also want to say this is going to air, I believe, Mr. Emperor Wilson, mid of January, just a couple of days after I've been doing a webinar called DevOps for Ops, kind of the first steps. And thanks to the Brian that I'm now introducing, I can actually also use some of his screenshots, and so people will actually see some of the stuff that we're talking about today. Without further ado, Brian,
I'll do further ado. I just want to tie in. It almost sounds like what you talked about from shifting from ops to test ties in a little bit to the last episode with shifting load right in that kind of special way. So anyhow, go on. Now back to Brian. Brian, special guest Brian Chandler. How are you doing?
Good. Well, first I want to say I'm honored to be carrying the title of Brian today. Thank you for that, dear Emperor. It's good. Really excited to be here. I'm just, I guess a little bit about me. I'm a systems engineer over at Raymond James right now on the application performance management team. We're a relatively new team there. It's the third organization I've worked with in the APM area. Been working with a pretty wide range of app types, internal facing, external facing, customer marketing apps. APM is just one of those things that kind of made sense and didn't have a problem getting indoctrinated into the whole philosophy, right? I mean, it's something amazing happens when somebody clicks or checks a box when you hit an app, right? It sprays across 40 servers, however many data centers, all those functions. So it's just a really exciting world to be in, and happy to be here.
And it sounds like you have it seems he sounds like he has a radio voice. It sounds like he's been doing this before, huh?
Well, I went out and got one of those fancy mics, of course, off of Amazon.
Yeah.
See,
that's cool.
He one-upped you. He's not using his headset.
Yeah, I know, and I'm using my headset now. So, hey, Brian, now let's dig into what you showed me in Tampa the other day, and because I believe it's a fundamental lesson that hopefully. Well, I mean, people should know about this, but I believe what you showed in your dashboards and the way you visualize it, it's a great way for operations to start thinking about the app not as one big thing and every endpoint is equal, but every endpoint has its own weight and its own priority or So, I mean, please explain. I mean, I'm looking at the dashboard right now, and it's labeled client-centered daily traffic pattern. Can you explain a little bit more about that and what you found out?
Right. So that's what you're looking at there is just the traffic pattern of our largest FA. And when I say FA, Financial Advisor app, it supports about 6,500 financial advisors or so right now. So a pretty wide range of users that manage tens of thousands of investors. And what I'm trying to paint with that picture there is to really fundamentally how important it is to understand how humans kind of organically use the app, and it's way different than what a QA team might intuitively think for a way to test something, right? If you think of an app that has like this one, for example, has 58 or so API calls or high level functions that the browser will go out and hit, when you check a box or hit that tab. And a QA tester somewhere might think, okay, well, I have this list, and it makes sense if I can just write a script that exercises all of these evenly, right? That might be the intuitive answer, but that's totally not the case for really any of the apps. I mean, it turns out for us, 3 out of those 58 API calls makes up about 60% of our traffic. So quickly you realize that you cannot treat all of them as equal citizens, right? If you're going to hang some type of service off of one of these API calls, it's going to have a fundamental impact on your app potentially. So, what we do over at Raymond James, we have this really, really cool, feedback loop with the QA team. We show them basically that graph. Every day they can pull that up and look at today's behavior from our users. And we say, okay, your tests, when you write them in LoadRunner or whatever tool you use, it's got to look like that picture. And you've exercised the app correctly when it looks like that picture.
So let me ask you the question now. That means you kind of tore down the walls between ops and test, because these two teams are now really actively sharing data on a day-to-day basis, huh?
Right. Yeah. You got to share the data. It's got to be. It's like free love. It's got to be free data for everyone, right? Go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry. And was this initiated by ops, or was this initiated by test, or what initiated the whole thing?
It was actually our team. Like I said, we were kind of a relatively new team in this last year. And we own, the DT tools in all environments, and we're working with these QA testers, and we're kind of exploring the things that we can do for them. And it's we just say, hey, well, your traffic patterns are looking like this, and you could look at the LoadRunner scripts they were originally kind of putting together, and the distribution wasn't exactly what it is in prod, and that just has huge implications there if you let something kind of go through with that kind of distribution. And it was just sort of a communications thing, right? We sat down and kind of showed them, okay, well, this is what prod looks like, and this is what we're looking like we're going to test here in LoadRunner. We got to adjust this a little bit.
And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, yes, this is basic in a way, but this is such a leap forward. If I go back to my old days of load testing, trying to get this kind of information out of ops was near impossible. They'd maybe have a weblog, which try making sense of that. This is not only visual, but very, very easy to read. And, heck, in the old days, we just kind of used to make an educated guess and what the traffic might be. This is kind of game changing, and it's not even like what we're looking at right here is something new that you can do in the APM tools. This has been around for a while, but I think just the concept of sharing that data, breaking down that walls you're saying, and sending the data back to the testers is quite incredible.
Go
ahead.
Sorry, the visualization. I almost want to say you created kind of like this flame charts, even though you chose obviously total different colors, not really flames. But I think you have different layers. You have different colors for the individual APIs. And if you have 58 different ones, and the top 3, as you said, consume or sum up to 60%, then you chose to visualize. Brian, Emperor Wilson. Can we also post the images later on
let's just make sure we have them scrubbed nice if we need to, and I think we can at least. Well, we'll have to see. Maybe at the very least we can provide links to them for somewhere. But yeah, we'll do something. Great. We'll get it out there somewhere. I think it's a good point. It's important to be able to see. I know we're talking about a graph and a chart, and if you can imagine it, I want you to imagine a graph. But I think the visualization really helps with the concept. Again, it's not groundbreaking when you look at it, but it's the groundbreaking side is, well, yeah, let's do this. Yeah. You know. Mm-hmm. And making that leap to share that data is where the groundbreaking comes into it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just how you augment the data, right? I mean, you think of these tools and, you think of the PurePath and the transaction tracing, but it's also, to me, they're just as much, data analysis tools and behavior analysis tools for your users as much as performance, right?
And it's basically a stacked bar chart, right? It's a stacked bar chart, and every measure is basically the volume of load that comes in on a certain API.
Yep.
And different colors, and you immediately see, hey, here are your top 3 consume 60% because the overall sum is just visually very appealing, interesting, cool, really cool stuff.
Yeah, it's a really good dashlet too. I mean, it's something, when you pull up the table view, have the half dashlet, half table view, you can actually go through and just kind of hit space bar, turn certain ones on and off. You can see, okay, what if I turn off this API call? How does that change the shape of the behavior of the app? And you can see, if I turned off one of those top 3 there, it would change the whole shape of that graph. So you can it's kind of just fun to mess around with that in that regard kind of too.
Mm-hmm. And I think what's also pretty nice, because, you talked about this, you're using, in this case, Dynatrace, and you're using it in production, but also in testing. And that means you can easily create the same dashboard in both environments, which then makes it so easy to compare them. And this is what you also show in your second chart that you sent me, where you see the difference between prod and what you simulate in load. And that was, I guess, when you realized that you're load testing something totally different that does not at all apply or does not at all reflect what's actually happening in production.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting because it kind of tells you can almost kind of point out, you can tell the story of, how these, the scripts were written. You can see, instead of like the nice organic sort of steady hump you see in prod of all of this, different functions kind of coming in organically from, various visits, load runner test, you can see obviously, okay, they started 500 users right now and they exercised all the API calls, and then the load runner test stopped and then it geared back up again, and you have this sort of spiky, sort of weird that you can see the whole story of the load test right there and kind of point it out. It's just kind of it's a series of peaks instead of kind of like this kind of steady stream of usage of all these API calls that you see in prod. So yeah, just being able, like I said earlier, like the QA team, it's great. They can pull both of these graphs up in real time and they can look at them both and say, do our tests, the things that we are exercising right now today, is it matching what we're seeing in prod? So yeah, it's been super useful.
Mm-hmm. And basically, it's actually, you can see 2 things here. You see unequal load distribution and unequal distribution between the API calls. So basically if you run these tests, you're testing something that is, you're testing something totally different. And therefore, even if your load test succeeds, it's almost like a failed test because you're obviously never going to have this pattern, yeah?
Yeah, because you're not hitting the right distribution, right? Again, we can follow up. We can do a companion blog or send out the images or something after this. But you can see that, their tests actually hit quadruple the total volume of the app, but it only hit about a third of what it was supposed to hit volume-wise on, the key API calls. So yeah, it was a failed test from the point of view you didn't even exercise the right muscles of the app. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this also kind of opens up a Pandora's box of modeling that production test, because besides, and this, Andy, I'm harking back to a little bit to the previous episode with the concept of shifting right for the load, where we talked about capturing the right metrics in production so that you can make sure you're modeling the same way in your pre-production environments. So, on the surface, we're talking about, the different API calls, but you can even take this further then and say, okay, if we got the same model of API calls, is our test environment also then giving us the same number of threads, the same number of queries that are being executed, and you can keep extending that comparison along different lines of metrics to make sure that you're getting a much closer production model, or discover that there might be something wrong in your test environment setup where maybe you're getting the right API model, but you're not exercising the same amount of database queries or threads, which might mean that you're possibly, maybe you're using the same search terms over and over, or something else like that, right? The danger is, though, you can go, where do you kind of stop in that model? Because you can go deep and deep and deep and deep and deep,
Oh yeah, it's a rabbit hole for sure. And yeah, once you start, and like you said, the API layer, just the usage of that is the tip of the iceberg. I mean, you get into an app that, it sprays over 40 different services, hundreds of different URLs and functions that it calls underneath that. And it's like, okay, yeah, now you got to start getting the right traffic trend on everything, going underneath the iceberg there, so to say.
But it's also very, very important to do that in a way, because if you do have that model set up well, and you are, even if it's the first layer below, even if you're just looking at the numbers of threads maybe and queries and connections and things like that, if you do get that model correct, and then a new code push comes into the pre-production and something gets thrown off, then that's when you'll be able to say, hey, this is going to make a change in this way in production.
Yep. Yeah. And it turns out, I mean, it's great. And you can almost kind of start turning the knob on, okay, if we introduce this service to this API call, or introduce the X number of calls to that, it's going to hang underneath this function. You kind of just got to, it's a little mathy, but yeah, you can definitely start turning the dial on those things and figuring out exactly how it's going to, impact your app as a whole.
That's because you have all these architectural metrics, as we call them, right? You have the pure path end to end, and then this transaction is making these many calls, and if you're now shifting things around, you can immediately see the increase in calls to the backend, calls to the database, when you start changing the way the services call each other, or the way if you change the implementation of the service. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things we're starting to quickly realize, and it's like, okay, how deep do you want to go here? And then you get into the whole. To me, it's kind of like you get into this anomaly detection system, at least in prod, that you have to eventually work your way towards. It's like, okay, what you put a drop in the water over here, and what ripple effect is it going to have on the system as over here, sort of thing. It's kind of like, that when we're talking about this stuff with my team at work, where it's kind of like that internet meme, Ancient Aliens, where the guy's like, it's aliens. It's always aliens. It's kind of like, it's all anomalies. It's all it is. Yeah. It's, you see, you can start, so one of the things that we're starting to do is querying all these backend services, like you see in the Pure Path and all that, or in starting to dump it into hardcore data analysis tools. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can approach this. I mean, the way we do it is there's a free Splunk version how we just sort of experiment with it. But you can obviously do it with Logstash. I know Dynatrace, you guys have the BT feed that can go into Logstash, Elasticsearch, Kibana, and that all works just as well too. But we're starting to say, okay, if you really want a good anomaly detection system, it's not good enough to do sort of a rolling minute by minute or hour by hour baseline. You got to be able to go back, say, 4 or 5 weeks for any given downstream service call or database call on any given minute, like 10:03 a.m. on a Tuesday, compared to the last 10:03 a.m. on a Tuesday's last 5 or so, right? I mean, to really zone in on, okay, what is not normal, and what kind of changes are you making to the system when you introduce new things.
Mm-hmm. So that means what you just mentioned, maybe interesting for the listeners. You are streaming out the data from your APM solution, which in this case is Dynatrace, to the free version of Elasticsearch, because I guess the free version allows you a certain number of data per day
Yeah, so it's actually Splunk. I think Elasticsearch is free forever. I mean, it's an open source solution. But yeah, I'm personally just kind of experimenting around with the free Splunk that lets you do 500 meg a day or so. But right now I'm dumping in because what I think DC-RUM really excels at is really measuring all of those dependent downstream services, not like a end-to-end kind of transaction from a pure path perspective, but actually measuring all of the little endpoints that it calls below that. Like DC-RUM is very good and excels at measuring things from a bottom-up perspective in an enterprise. That's where it's really good. And there's a SOAP action plugin that you can dump data into Splunk with, and actually there's a really good DC-RUM extension out there in the community that I think it was one of the Guardians. Shoot, I hope I don't get this name wrong. I believe it was Brett Barrett. He actually developed it, and you can go in and create a SOAP REST call URL. It's just a really nice GUI that he put together. They say, okay, I want this data to come out of Splunk for these operations and these dimensions, and all you got to do is just kind of dump it into your Splunk REST grabber, and you can get all that data, every minute. And it's especially good with the DC-RUM, 1 minute time intervals that they just came out with in the EAP program, and that's just been awesome. So yeah, for the past 5-6 weeks, we've been collecting every operation in the enterprise every minute and just kind of dumping it in there, and it's only taken up 200-300 meg a day, and I'm running it off of just a little 2-core VPC, and we're experimenting around with saying, okay, this endpoint, how is he supposed to behave at 10:03 a.m. on a Tuesday, from kind of a whole enterprise perspective.
So I got 2 quick things to say here. Sorry, Emperor Wilson, I didn't want to interrupt you.
Oh no, go on, Andy.
2 quick things for the listeners that are not familiar with some of the terminology. DC-RUM is our network-centric APM product. And you said, it's kind of sniffing from the bottom up and great for the enterprise to monitor network traffic. But Brian, the other thing, it seems what you're trying to solve a very interesting problem that a lot of APM vendors, including Dynatrace, also try to solve out of the box, which is, applying machine learning, applying artificial intelligence actually on top of the data that we collect, and then alert you in case something is out of normal behavior by looking back at historical data, by looking back at particular endpoints and how they behaved a week ago if you have weekly cycles, a month ago if you have monthly cycles, or whatever cycles you have.
Wouldn't it be amazing? Then alert. If there's a tool that could do this, Andy?
Say it again.
Wouldn't our listeners love to know if there's a tool that can do this?
It would be like a Christmas present, and it's 4 days before Christmas. That's almost impossible. Or do you think something like that exists?
I don't know. Tell me more about this.
Yeah, you guys, but I want to look like a total hero, right? I want to beat my head up against a rock, and it's it's the same thing. I totally agree. That's kind of where everyone's going. It turns into this kind of machine learning, you need something that can be able to detect these things. So I do realize it's like all this might just be foolhardy, and I should just wait for the machines to the AI
you don't have to wait
overloads to take over.
You don't. The beauty is you don't have to wait, and I hate to be a commercial now, but that's what we do.
That's true. Yeah.
So basically, for the listeners, maybe go on dynatrace.com and check out Davis and check out artificial intelligence. So basically, we saw the trend. What you guys have been building, that's great, right? You can obviously do this with our AppMon data, our DC-RUM data, but we saw the trend, and that's why we came up with our out-of-the-box artificial intelligence engine that we put into our product. But that's, I think, enough with the commercials. If people want to learn more, Meet Davis, I think, is a great way to start. If you Google or Bing or search for Dynatrace Meet Davis, then you will find more.
I wanted to ask Brian, before we go on, just briefly, in case some other users out there might want to do something like this. You mentioned the free Splunk version, and as far as the 500 meg daily data cap, are you coming in below that with both Dynatrace AppMon data and DC-RUM data, or is that just the DC-RUM data on its own?
That's just the DC-ROM data, so we're not quite feeding in the business transaction feed into it quite yet, because we do suspect that we are in QA and we're just kind of putting together models of how we're going to slice and dice the data and deal with it. But yeah, that's just DC-ROM today.
Right, and the general concept there is right. Is Dynatrace collects all this data, and we have a lot of ways of presenting it. But if you want to get extremely creative in how you want to slice and dice and do, complex multidimensional analysis of the data, you can put it into something like Splunk or Elasticsearch and run any kind of queries and correlations against that data that you can imagine. So if you, it's interesting that Splunk has that free cap, so that you don't have to necessarily set up. I think I looked into doing a Kibana Elasticsearch setup, and it required just for the base setup a significant amount of horsepower just to get that running. So if anyone's looking to play with with the idea of seeing what you can do once you export the data, it's nice to know that Splunk has that free option there. Mm-hmm. Anyhow, moving on.
Yeah, hey Brian, still staying on that topic. Besides response time and failure rate, any other measures that you are pushing into Splunk and then doing your anomaly detection on?
So right now it really is just response time, load, and failure rate. Well, actually, we're not even. It's really just response time and load, and software services and operations times. And, once we kind of put this model together, we'll obviously we'll dump in more metrics like that. But that's totally. That's totally important too, right? You suspect not only X amount of load and a certain X response time for some endpoint, but you also suspect X amount of 401 response codes or 200 response codes, right? Because you're going to have a normal amount of 401 response codes when a service hits some other service and challenges it for authentication, things like that. Yeah. So that's definitely. That's definitely another good piece of it. And yeah, and one other thing too. I mean, one of the things that kind of stuck with me when I started here where I'm at is one of the management said, what's important here is we try to cut down on the amount of smart guy correlation we need to solve performance issues. And that goes right into the whole Davis thing too, right? It's once you set up this system that can kind of start telling you how to find these things, you can have your engineers not have to sit there and compare graphs and cross check things and kind of look like I use a GIF image on one of my slides that kind of like, Zach Galifianakis in The Hangover, where he's got all the graphs and stats going over his face. You kind of have your engineers doing that and wasting time doing that when obviously, they could be doing a lot of other productive things like, just the message of APM, right? You spend more time, one of the messages, spend more time innovating, not less time in fighting fires.
Yeah. Hey, and, I like that. Maybe some additional metrics, maybe you have them already on the list, but I can think about something like the number of bytes sent and received per endpoint, because that immediately allows you to see if maybe an API change or maybe a new deployment all of a sudden is causing some issues on the amount of data you send back and forth. Maybe somebody forgot to turn compression on a certain layer, and then you send so much more data over the wire, because Dynatrace and DC-ROM obviously capture package sizes and network and then request and response sizes. Also, I believe we talk all the time about number of database queries being executed, number of web service calls or REST calls, microservice calls being executed, number of threads being involved. With the Pure Path, you see how many threads are involved. And I recently I think I blogged about this. It happened to ourselves within Dynatrace. Our DC-ROM team was actually using Appmon to analyze DC-ROM, and they made some quote-unquote optimizations, but then what actually happened, their optimization was actually spawning a lot of background threads to do work parallel because they thought it's faster, which for a short term it was faster, but they were soon running into the boundaries of the number of threads they have in their worker pools. So basically they were just filling up all the threads that are doing a lot of stuff in parallel, slowing down the overall system. And that was also very interesting. And the number of threads per request, and if they also do this by endpoint, these are great these are great metrics that you can then, from an operations side, obviously give back and say, hey, since the last deployment, we saw a change in behavior because now we are consuming twice the amount of threads. We are logging 5 times as many log messages. So log messages per entry point or per entry point, and all these things. Great values.
And go ahead.
I was going to ask Brian if you. I remember when we were preparing for this, you kind of had a similar story with hanging some other services off of an API call. I don't know if you wanted to.
Yeah,
kind of tie that into what Andy was talking about with monitoring those other components and maybe how that all ties in.
Yeah, so this is kind of, you always have those epiphany moments, and this was one of those that were like, okay, this is something we need to pay attention to, and this is important, right? We had this API call that it was one of those big hitters, about 18% of the traffic, and it kind of gets into how you architect different services, and you have to be smart about, well, okay, we might want to invoke this service when a user does some action on the GUI, but you got to be able to understand the implications of that. So in testing, we realized that hey, if we tie this service call to this API call, that means that API call is also tied to this checkbox on the GUI. And you get some fidgety guy that just likes to check boxes on and off, in a GUI. That's I would say that's part of the reason why it's high volume, but it's high volume because it's used a lot. It's a function on the GUI that's used a lot, that it's enough to make 18%. So those are the types of things that, okay, this is important, right? We have humans using these very popular things on the GUI of the app, which makes these underlying API calls heavily used, and then you have this exponential, increase in service calls due to that. So, I mean, this particular one was sort of a document sharing system between an FA and a client, and we noticed in testing, okay, this call is getting made a lot, and we're going to basically see this exponential increase in the back end of this service call, syncing documents between the FA and the client. So that was something that we could say, whoa, okay, we better not run off that cliff, before we run it into production. So that worked out well. And in that same vein, one of the things that we're doing today is we kind of slowly onboard functionality, sort of like, A/B testing or some companies, they'll convert certain users over to some piece of functionality in an app. And right now we have like a new CRM system we're kind of bringing out. And today we have about 1% of our users converted over. And we're able to look at, okay, how is this being exercised? How is the performance? Is it deterministic, meaning is it 300 milliseconds solid, just like our old legacy version of this service, or is it all over the place, right? And if it's all over the place, we catch it now while it's 1% of our users using this, then and feedback to the dev and QA teams before, it's 50% or 100% of our users using this.
Right. And besides just the response time and all that, if you're looking at all those other metrics that Andy's talking about, the service calls, the database queries, the threads, all these other components, when it's at 1%, you have a chance to figure out what's that model going to look like when we push everybody else over, and is this model going to survive? So that's, going back to Andy's points, that's why monitoring all these things in those production environments is so key and important.
Yeah, like I said, it's human behavior. It's impossible to replicate. It's very hard to replicate. So I mean that this production type data is just gold to or our teams to the left, right?
Yeah, and I think it's just hopefully with all this data, and if you really feed it back from operations into test, but also into dev, especially should dev the resource utilization of their features, and also if we can tie some kind of a cost factor, because in the end, and I think this is something I brought up in one of the previous episodes, trying to educate all the engineering teams that we not only need to build software that is fast from a response time perspective and super nice and user experience friendly, but also that is efficient. because in the end, I can write super fast code, but spawning 500 parallel threads and do something very strange and write millions of log files that nobody needs, but I need to feed it into Splunk, but then nobody cares about it. So I think these are the things we need to feed back as well to say, great feature that you built, but it's too costly because of this, and this metric. Yeah.
Yep.
Hey, and for your A/B testing, I'm interested in what you just said. So in your case, are you selectively onboarding individual users by changing their user profile and then they're getting redirected to that particular server? Or is it every server has the same code base and you just turn it on depending on the user? How does it work?
So it's a function of, it's somewhere in the, I don't know the technical specifics of it, but essentially they can grab a list of users is what they're doing today, and they say, okay, these users are going to be converted over to the new service. So if you hit F12 in their browsers, they're calling a different API call than 99% of everyone else. So it's just the behavior in the F12 tab is different compared to them. But GUI wise, they're seeing it's the same thing to them, sort of thing.
But is the code of let's say the B version of it, is the code running on different separate hosts, so they're totally separated, or they run on the same host as the other code runs too, and just the flag then defines, hey, this code now executes this here, and the code on the same host is executing now another path?
Yeah, that's essentially it. So like on the API layer, sort of the front door of the data center, if they hit, there's a flag that says, okay, these users are going to take this route and these users are going to hit this other route. And then, the users that are converted over are spraying across, the whole other system, right? And then all the other users are there. This API call basically points and sprays over some other system over there, sort of thing. So that's kind of how we're doing with it right now.
Cool. Are you leveraging user experience monitoring too?
Yes, actually, we had an interesting. So one of the new, you always Atmon is funny. You always think that all the little nooks and crannies, and you always find some other cool thing to use it by. And so there's this one app that we're just rolling out, and it's another kind of slow rollout where we're bringing out, I think it was 20 or 30 people that kind of volunteered to be an alpha tester for it. And we're immediately finding ways that the QA testers couldn't or didn't think of ways to exercise the app or exercise the functionality, right? And so one of the things is they found some user action coming supposedly from a completely linked from a different app in our enterprise, and they were trying to figure out, well, how is this happening? Or we didn't expect them to kind of take this route in this app. And it's those interesting things you can find. So this sort of cool new functionality I learned from a user experience analysis perspective in Atmon is that you go to the visits tab, you type in a username, and then if you don't filter any apps, it'll show you, okay, well, here's this user, and then they might have multiple visits based on, them visiting multiple apps in your enterprise. So what we actually ended up doing is we control-clicked all three of their visits and drilled down into the user action pure paths from there. And then you get a complete sequential list of their entire journey throughout the entire day, overlaying all these apps. So what was cool is we were able to see, they were in app A, and then they hit a link in app A, which then brought them to app B. And then in the Dynatrace GUI, you see a switch apps within the user action pure path dashboard. So I think that's really cool because we could watch this user bounce between different apps from an enterprise perspective, not just kind of like a application perspective. So that was something that was kind of cool and new that we kind of stumbled upon. So that helped a lot too, right there.
And so we always learn something new about our users, what they do. The strange ways, the strange paths they're taking.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Those humans are so unpredictable,
I know.
If we could all be machines.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. That would be good.
Is anybody watching Westworld by any chance on HBO?
Oh yeah,
I watched the first episode, but
it's very creepy. It's very real. Have you, Brian? Have you watched it the whole season?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm one of those freaks that has to immediately go on all the internet forums and read up all the theories and Yeah, it was actually the internet did so well at figuring out all of the major spoilers before the finale that it was like, oh, okay, I know all this. So maybe season 2, I won't, I'll just kind of enjoy and watch the show. But it's a very good show. Yeah,
it is. And Mr. Wilson, Emperor Wilson,
yes.
You should check it out.
I'm dying to see the original Westworld movie, the one with Yul Brynner. It just hasn't been on streaming yet. I haven't been able to see it. It's probably late 60s, early 70s. Style sci-fi starring Yul Brynner, King and I, the guy with that shaved head, and I think there was a quote from him, if I didn't get it wrong, about him saying that him playing that machine was one of the most comfortable natural roles for him, which is pretty awesome. But I really like to see the campy version. I watched the first episode. I don't have too much time for TV, and it just didn't hook me in, but maybe at the recommendation of the two of you, especially another fellow Brian, I'll have to go back and at least give it a few more episode shots,
That's right. You can go on a major binge watch now. It's all streamable.
Yeah. Hey, Brian, I got one more question. Coming kind of back to how we started. We started with, operations gave, especially testing the insight on which APIs are hit how often, so you can actually model better loads and distribution of load for your load tests. Now, how do you deal with test data? Because I assume, the only way this really makes sense is also having good test data. Do you also replicate, and does operations provide test data to pre-prod, kind of tearing down this wall as well?
Yeah, they do to an extent. I don't know the specifics on it, but I do know that they do that to an extent. That is important to be able to do. Just to be able to exercise and replicate the functionality, as it should be, right? Yeah, because you're right. There could be so many different. They at least emulate the diversity of relationships that you might have. You would say, okay, well, on average, we have a mix of, a 20 clients to 1 FA kind of relationship. So they might replicate, okay, this is the kind of mix of relationships that we need, to be able to exercise, because one service call could be very heavy. The same, to another, service call, even though they're the same endpoint, because, you might have an FA that has 40 clients compared to 100, and they got to pull, how much data back. So yeah, they definitely mix the different types and combinations of data that you can have there.
Cool. And that's interesting. I just wanted to make sure that I was interested in what you guys are doing. And are you have you ever played around with load testing in production? Have you ever thought about something like crazy like this?
No, not quite. Although, so at a different organization, though, we have thought about it because it was before I was with Raymond James. We didn't quite have our prod environment scale or QA environment scaled to our prod, and it wasn't. And the way the app behaved, it was kind of these image creation, this image creation server, right? And if you had one of them, basically the speed at which it can create these images was a function of how fast the disk could read and write. And it was not a linear scale. So if you had one of these image servers and then 4 of them, it wasn't like, okay, you just need to push 1/4 of the prod data to it. It was like, it would actually behave a little bit differently if you had 4 servers. Like it wouldn't just be, okay, you can push 4 more through. Like the disk would actually lock up at different rates. So we thought about that, waking up at like 3 a.m. or something like that. We didn't end up doing that, but yeah, it's not something we're doing today, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, gentlemen, I thought this was an amazing discussion, especially around the kind of like coming back to the title. We have to love our data because there's so much we can learn. And I'm really looking forward when this show airs and we can then show the charts we all here looked at, kind of showing the audience on what you can do with these flame charts that are not flamish but are having other colors. But really look great. But you do have flame charts, right? The third dashboard that we have in our email here includes flame charts.
Mm-hmm.
Are you talking about the, I'll have to pull it up. I don't know if you're talking about the red wave of death where you got the yellow, green, red. Oh, yeah. So that's good. Yeah, you can use flame charts, red wave of death, either works. We actually have a fourth color in there you don't see. But the fourth color is the purple wave of death. So that's just performance right there, green, from an API layer, I'm sorry. So in UEM, red will count as a frustrated visit as if somebody throws a 500 or 400 or something like that. But from an API layer perspective, we have a fourth color. Okay, was it slow, fast, or okay? Or did it throw a 500 or 400 error? And that's purple. So if we have an account lockout or something, you'll see a giant purple wave there because the API calls at that point are very fast, but they're failing very fast, right? They're at 20 milliseconds. So if we didn't have that fourth purple color in there, it would just be it would say, hey, everything's great when it's not. That's what we have for all our apps there.
That's why one must always connect response time and failure rate, because that's the only
Exactly. Yes. That is very important. Yeah.
Well, Brian,
so that was awesome.
Yes, thank you so much for being on. Andy, did you want to do any other sort of summary? You haven't done one in a while.
I know. I mean, my summary is really, I believe, modern operation teams, and coming back to what I will be talking about at the webinar, which happened the week before this one airs. But I believe modern operation teams need to break down their walls from the right to the left, and providing better, meaningful data about the applications, about the patterns that users use the applications, also about dependencies when we talk about all these metrics like the number of web service calls, the bytes sent and received and all that. Because as operations, you really have a view of your real users and how they use the app. And you can level up your testers by allowing them to model better load tests, like in your case, and you also can give direct feedback to your development teams and saying, hey, whatever you just did, first of all, people love your feature, but the feature is doing something very weird and you're consuming too many resources, right? I mean, this is the perfect feedback loop, and especially if it then coming to this mode, what you guys are doing with A/B testing, if you can give this feedback on individual features or on individual canary releases, this is perfect, I believe. So ops, I believe, can step up. They don't have to wait for DevOps to happen from the dev side, but I believe ops can start themselves and make a step towards the testers and the development teams. That's what I believe.
Perfect.
Very good. I just want to remind everybody that Perform is coming up, and Andy and I will both be running some hot sessions on Perform. And I actually just noticed my session is not on the page, which probably explains why we don't have many people signed up for it. I'll be doing an e-commerce monitoring hot session the second half of the day on February 6th. Andy, which ones are you going to be doing Perform in, where's that, in Las Vegas this year?
I'm doing the shift left continuous integration session. I'm doing one in the morning and one in the afternoon. So the idea is we're building a Jenkins pipeline using the latest Jenkins pipeline feature, having a Spring Boot app with 2 microservices. So setting up the pipeline, pushing the app through the pipeline, and then simulating some bad code changes, and then seeing what happens if you don't have Dynatrace in there. And then another one where we can use Dynatrace to stop the bad code change before the change goes into production and kills everything.
Excellent. And Mr. Chandler, are you going to perform this year?
I am. In fact, Excellent. I'll be in a breakout session, I think the first day. I think it was creating performance tuning heroes or something along those lines. I believe we're going to be with Mr. Thorsten Roth, my manager, and I, going through much of the same, not exactly everything we talked about today, but I'm sure we're going to touch on it a fair bit. But yeah, come on over to our breakout session.
Excellent.
Are you wearing a cape because you're a superhero?
I've been trying to pick out which Avenger, our team is, and we gotta, we'll have to. We're still out on that one. The jury's still out. We're gonna figure that one out.
That also means tights.
Yes. So will that make more people come to our room?
Yes.
If we kind of post that. Yeah. All right. We'll be sure.
No matter what, it will. Yes. Wear tights. Absolutely.
All right.
Please. Andy will wear his leaderhose, and if you wear his tights. Right. Andy, I just committed you. Bring it home with you.
Yeah.
Anyhow, thanks a lot, everybody. Any final words from you, Brian? I know we're kind of rambling here, so any quick last words there for you?
No, that was great. And just like Andy said, it's a great opportunity, these types of tools, being able to analyze this data in production to get more involved, on the life cycle as a whole, right? I mean, you become more than just watchers of green check marks and red X's, right? You can actually feed back this rich data and be a really, really good part of the process.
Absolutely.
And then shameless plug for my Twitter. You can follow me at Channer531, CHANNER531, and that's about it.
Great. And you can follow us at pure_DT. I am at Emperor Wilson. We also have at Grabner Andy for all the Twitters. And don't forget, you can also, if you're a YouTuber, we're now publishing these to YouTube. So if for some reason you'd like to have a video playing with a static image while you listen to the audio, you can do that as well. That's all for me. I'd like to thank everybody for listening, and thank you, Brian, for being such a gracious guest today. And Andy, thank you as always.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Andy, go get some sleep. Go get some sleep, Andy.
Yeah, I'll get some sleep now. Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.